At last, the dance begins. That was an phenomenal finale. It was basically what I thought episode 9 was going to be originally, with the spoilers, chompy chomp. What did you think of the episode? What did you feel when watching it? Let me know down below. This episode, I felt, was kind of about 3 things. It was about dragons being nuclear weapons, giving peace a chance, and blood and loyalty. Let's talk about that first one. Dragons are nuclear weapons. Viserys was right, okay, when he said that dragons are a power that man never should have trifled with. You know, with Targaryens emphasizing how their power comes from dragons, or they are dragons themselves, and makes them closer to the gods. But House of the Dragon repeatedly demonstrates that for all of their talk, the Targaryens are only kinda in control of the dragons. We see Daemon's Caraxes just stomping on a Valyrian soldier. We see the chaos that Meleys wrecks when she girl bosses the small folk. And I mean, we've seen this before, remember? With Daenerys and how she can barely control Drogon. Drogon eats kids. And then in this episode, perhaps most viscerally of all, we see how Lucerys' death is because Lucerys and Aemond couldn't control their dragons. Arrax goes and flames Vhagar to the face, and Vhagar, well, she chomp. This is a little bit different from the books, where Aemond is definitely portrayed to have done this intentionally. Like in the show, he goes after Lucerys to take one of his eyes, but then he's held back. But in the books, one of Lord Borman Baratheon's daughters then goads him and says, you know, was it one of your eyes Lucerys took or one of your balls? And that prompts him to chase after Lucerys. Now, the writers for the show seem to have done this sort of change a few times now in the series, where they water down the intent of a character. We see this with Kristen Cole's murder of Lyman Beesbury and Alicent's kind of misreading of the prophecy with Viserys that makes her want to put Aegon on the throne. So these things can now be read as accidents. And it's important to remember that Fire and Blood is written like a history book. It's written with biases, so this is not like the one correct way that the story should be interpreted. There are multiple versions of most events in the book, but there is something really interesting in having characters make bad decisions deliberately that are motivated, that change the stakes, because this is a huge escalation rather than them sort of just stumbling through the plot accidentally. But in the case of Aemond and Lucerys, I think there is actually a better narrative reason behind it to portray it as an accident. They seem to want to explore how dragons exacerbate the worst aspects and instincts of their riders, the people around them. Aemond was chasing after Lucerys, and Lucerys was terrified, and the dragons just took that and went with it until chomp. It's that Targaryen arrogance thinking they can control their dragons, and, you know, this is a story about the flaws of House Targaryen. It's delusional to think that they could fully control them, and they make things worse most of the time. They are nuclear weapons that these kids are tossing around like hot potatoes. The story also, and I'm not going to get into spoilers here, is clearly setting up a dynamic with how the world views dragons as these uncontrollable, dangerous monsters, who at best can have their havoc steered in the right direction. Still, even with all of this, I do kinda wish that they continued with that Daemon-Aemond parallel and gave Aemond this moment of cruel, decisive action.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a little bit more, and I think I would have preferred fewer accidents that kind of make this conflict happen. Just, you know, make it characters making decisions, you know, character-driven stuff.
You know, and continuing with that theme, we see later in the episode that Daemon goes to see Vermithor. Now, this was the dragon of King Jaehaerys. He's one of the oldest and biggest ones. And Daemon, even though he's known him for, you know, decades, he's still very cautious around him. That's one detail that really sets, you know, Fire and Blood and the Song of Ice and Fire apart from other kind of Dragon Rider stories, is that it goes into how really, truly dangerous having these creatures in the world would be. And I think they're trying to give some more meaningful consequences to that and play that into the story, rather than just sort of pin it all on the writers. While I do think that Lucerys' death was pretty much perfect, that shot of Vhagar's shadow appearing above him was exactly how I imagined it in the books. But I do kind of wish that we had just a little scene of kind of Lucerys and Arax as dragon, a little moment of warmth between them, them pressing heads together or something. Maybe it's cheesy, but I would have just loved that because, we haven't had a huge amount of screen time with them. That being said, I don't have any real complaints. They really got that horror. Like Laura, my partner, she said that the moment she saw Aemond in the Baratheon throne room, she said, I already know Lucerys is dead. She knew he was dying. And that moment where Arax flies above the clouds and you think he's gotten out of it, it reminded me of that moment from Matrix Revolutions. If you know, you know. And yet, in between all of this violence, we also have Alicent and Rhaenyra who want to give peace a chance. Now, there is this really interesting line in the episode where Rhaenyra says, we don't choose our destinies, it chooses us. Which is funny as hell, because this entire conflict is about people choosing the destinies of others. Otto choosing for Alicent choosing for Aegon, Rhaenyra choosing for her kids. For all the Targaryens tout this idea of their destiny, the entire show is a testament to how they just manufacture it for themselves. And then they pretend that they had no control, that all of this just had to happen, and then people die because of it. And it's because of that that I have really loved this nuance they have added to Rhaenyra, where she is kind of second guessing whether she wants the throne at all. It's like she has finally learned from her dad the weight of power. And in this episode, she considers not fighting at all. She's the only one who considers that actually, destiny is my choice here. And Daemon says, hey, that's Viserys talking. Which is like, yeah, it is, dick. Hashtag Chadman Viserys. Fire and Blood, interestingly, very much paints Alicent and Rhaenyra as going at each other's throats. Like, Alicent says, apparently, mayhaps the whore will die in childbirth, and while Rhaenyra is giving birth, she's just screaming curses at Alicent. But they are actually the only two people who really want peace, while they are surrounded by people like Daemon and Otto, who are wanting to cause a war. Rhaenyra has to tell Daemon, does the prospect of war excite you? If I could take the throne without blood, would you even want to? So she seems to sort of realize that, hey, if my duty is to ensure the realm is healthy and at peace and not drowning in blood, then maybe the best option here is to not fight at all. Daemon is obsessed with war, even as she is giving birth, as he can hear her screams through the walls, he is planning this war he wants to fight. And he tells Rhaenyra, he says, it's your duty to take the throne, to put down the rebels. So again, we're seeing kind of this thin veneer of destiny to hide kind of what people truly want to do. Now, there was a disturbing moment in this episode where he chokes Rhaenyra, Anakin style, and my partner said that it kind of felt a little bit out of character for him. I think if you think about it, really it wasn't. He killed his last ex-wife, with a rock to the head. He takes pleasure in the violence he commits. This isn't really that far of a step out from the one we know. I think why it felt a little bit strange is that we want Daemon to be a hero. We want him to be good. You yearn for him to just be a good guy. And this doesn't really necessarily fit in with that. And he's always been for the most part pretty good to Rhaenyra. It also doesn't help that, Matt Smith is just really likable as a guy. But ultimately, I do think it's within the character that we know in the show, and the one we know in the books, actually. So we've got Rhaenyra wanting peace, and we also have Alicent who wants peace. She wants to give Rhaenyra peaceful terms, whereas Otto does not. He just wants to kill her. Now, she sends Rhaenyra a message, and that message is the page of the history book that Rhaenyra ripped out in the first episode. And that page was about Nymeria, a Rhoynar princess who came to Dorne, who led her people there. And I think you can interpret this message in a few ways. One, it's a reminder of their friendship when they were young, when they cared about each other, and just saying, hey, let's be friends, let's not turn this into something ugly. But two, you can look at this as her saying, hey, look at Nymeria. Nymeria didn't want to fight the Valerians, the dragons, when they came. She instead left. She chose the more peaceful option. You could be like Nymeria, like you wanted to be as a kid. And that might be going through Rhaenyra's head to find a new way towards peace. Or 3, this reminded her of an important female leader that inspired her as a kid. And seeing that again might, motivate her to fight for her rights in a way that she wasn't quite feeling before. She's asking herself, will she be like Nymeria and lead her people? I love the layers of that symbolism. And building into this contrast of those for peace and those for war, we have the 2 different crowns that Aegon wears and Rhaenyra wears. Aegon wears the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, while Rhaenyra is given the crown of Jaehaerys. That's Viserys' father. Jaehaerys, by the way, was called the Conciliator, while Viserys was called the Peaceful. And the crown itself has the symbols of all the other houses carved into it. Symbolically, we have Aegon, who was put on the throne by force, like the Conqueror, who demands the submission of others and wears a symbol of domination. And then there's Rhaenyra, who is kind of standing more for peace and wears a symbol of unity. It was Sir Eric who bought her the crown. There are so many similar names in this. We've got Rhaenyra, Rhaenys, Rhaena. I love that this world has like 3 names that they just recycle. Chad Martin move, I say. But, of course, any chance of peace died in the chomp. And I have to wonder, will Aemond claim responsibility for it? Is he gonna, saunter back in and go, hey, yeah, I killed Lucerys. That's on me. Because, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think he will? Or do you think he's just kind of going to be like, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Mum. Accidentally killed Lucerys. Lastly, this episode is about blood and loyalty. In terms of blood, Rhaenyra is giving birth. And so again, we're focusing in on that female pain that men ignore for the most part. In the books, by the way, the baby is described as a monster, a stillborn girl, twisted and malformed with a hole in her chest where her heart should have been and a stubby, scaled tail. This is actually something that happens multiple times in Martin's writing. Daenerys gives birth to a similar child in the main series. It's a thing that Targaryens do when they have miscarriages, apparently, sometimes. But Rhaenyra even blames her miscarriage on the Greens. That description, of course, is quite overblown. That's the history bias for you. But I will note that if you look closely in the episode, you can see that the child's skull is actually a little bit malformed. I won't show you for obvious reasons. And now both sides are looking for loyalty. The Greens and the Blacks are looking for their allies in the major houses. Rhaenyra sends Jaehaerys to the Arryns and the Starks, because that's going to be the longer, harder journey, while she sends Lucerys down south. It's a quick journey, and apparently the Baratheons are going to be easy to win over. Famous last words. Storm's End will stand with us, Princess Rhaenys said. Rhaenyra herself was of that blood on her mother's side, and the late Boromund had always been the staunchest of friends. Likewise, Daemon married into the family, and he probably didn't kill his wife in the books, which is why that argument is a bit more convincing. And of the Starks, we're told that by the time the Starks gather their banners and march south, the war might well be over. The scene where they send Jaehaerys and Lucerys are straight out of the book, even them swearing on the 7-pointed star. I really loved that. But let's talk about why Boris Baratheon was not on their side, okay? There is a line somewhere in this book, and I cannot find it for the life of me. So if you do know what line I'm talking about, please leave it for me down in the comments below. But basically, what it says is that a lot of the lords in Westeros didn't want to support Rhaenyra because it would throw their own entitlements into question, as well as the entitlements of their sons. Basically, if the royal family, allows women to inherit first because they're the eldest child, then isn't that going to soon apply to their families? And Boris Baratheon is kind of the poster boy for that argument. He says in the books, I have nothing against women. Women are precious, fragile, weak things. Very precious, though. But if I ever had a son, then they would get Storm's End, not one of that lot. Yeah, well, the little girls over there, none of them. But also there was politics for why he chose to side against the Blacks. Rhaenyra basically sent a message that reminded him of the power of dragons, which is a thinly veiled threat in a way, whereas Aemond turned up and said, hey, I'll marry one of your daughters, although apparently he kissed all of the daughters just to see which one he liked most. So there was a political alliance on offer there as well. Lastly, we have House Velaryon choosing to side with Rhaenyra. Now, Corlys, for once in a blue moon, says that, hey, no, let's not go to war. Let's just go back to high tide. Let's just spend time with the family. But Rhaenys says, no, we can't do that anymore. You guys have been egging for war for ages, and now it's happening, and now you've got to fight. You don't have much of a choice. So they pick a side. They pick the side that they kind of have to. I will note, I really liked that scene where Corlys returned because we got to hear the House Velaryon theme, and one of the kind of disappointments I've had with House of the Dragon is the lack of distinctive music, the lack of distinctive themes, more so. We get a little bit of Targaryens here and there and a little bit of kind of Rhaenyra, but I feel like Hightower and Velaryon should have been a lot more present than they were, or, you know, characters like Daemon to have their own themes. But the dance has begun, and I think it'd be good for us to understand the state of both sides going into Season 2. The Blacks have the Velaryon fleet and are able to cut off trade to King's Landing, so they control the Narrow Sea and the Stepstones. They also have more dragons. They've got Melees, Syrax, Vermax, Morning, Moondancer, and Caraxes, who is battle-hardened and experienced. The Greens, on the other hand, have King's Landing. They've got a lot more money, the Lannisters, the Hightowers, and the Baratheons. They also have Vhagar, the largest dragon in the world, as well as Sunfire and Dreamfire. They have a few others. In fact, both sides have a few others, but those are mostly just little babies. So, the question is, who will win? You decide. Well, no, destiny will decide. The last thing I want to mention is something that I wish they included in this episode. We get it kind of hinted at, but never really explored. Sir Eric and Sir Arik are twins who are fighting on opposite sides in the war. Sir Eric for Rhaenyra and Sir Eric for Aegon. And there's this little moment in the book where, well, it's a tragic tale, and I just want to read you this. Long after the dance was done, the singer Lucian of Tarth would compose a sad ballad called Farewell, My Brother, still sung today. The song purports to relate to the last meeting between Sir Eric Cargill and his twin Sir Eric, as Orwell's party was boarding the ship that would carry them back to King's Landing. That's the peace delegation we saw in this episode. In the song, each brother tries to persuade the other to change sides. Failing, they exchange declarations of love and part, knowing that when they next meet, it will be as enemies. It is possible that such a farewell did and take place that day on Dragonstone, however, none of our sources make mention of such. I would have loved to have seen that. I think it would be very easy for a lot of people to miss that there are twins entirely, but it would have been a nice dynamic to just set up for the future. House of the Dragon is about the cracks in the system and the people who fall through it and the people who defend it. The violence that comes from ambitious second sons, the prejudice against female inheritance, a system where power is based on the temperamental control of draconic nuclear weapons, and an obsession with destiny driving people to war. Over and over, people convince themselves that these things just have to happen, that it is a noble cause because it is destiny, when it's so much less than that. All a smokescreen for their own personal flaws, biases, and ambitions, and people die because of it. Lucerys was first blood, but there is much more to come.